You work in international freight forwarding, not the glamorous side, not private jets and luxury imports, containers, manifests, delays. You sit behind two monitors in a glass office overlooking a port that never sleeps. Ships stack up on the horizon like gray apartment blocks. Cranes move with slow precision. Everything runs on timing. You're good at timing. Your job is simple on paper: move cargo from point A to point B. In reality, it's about friction. Customs friction. Political friction. Port congestion. You specialize in the routes other coordinators avoid. Unstable ports in West Africa. Customs-heavy crossings in Central Asia. Embargo-adjacent regions where paperwork must be perfect because scrutiny is automatic. You know the difference between a shipment that gets flagged and one that glides through. Bills of lading. Harmonized system codes. Country of origin declarations. You memorize tariff schedules the way other people memorize song lyrics. You understand bonded warehouses, temporary import bonds, re-export certificates. You know which ports require pre-arrival documentation 72 hours in advance, and which ones lose paperwork unless someone makes a phone call. You don't move weapons. You move cargo. At least that's what you tell yourself. Your clients are varied. Agricultural equipment suppliers, infrastructure contractors, medical distributors, and, occasionally, security logistics firms. Private military contractors, though, they never call themselves that. On paper, they provide risk mitigation, convoy protection, site security. They operate in places where governments are thin and insurance premiums are high. They require discrete logistics. Sensitive equipment, they call it. Night vision optics, communications arrays, armored vehicle components, dual-use items that sit comfortably in gray zones. Nothing technically illegal, just complicated. Items that require precise classification codes so they don't trigger unnecessary inspections. You learn which descriptions invite questions and which close them. Ruggedized communication modules moves faster than encrypted field radios. Protective ballistic composites sounds better than body armor. You're not falsifying documents. You're optimizing language. That's how you see it. When a shipment moves cleanly through a port known for delays, you feel a quiet satisfaction. When a customs officer stamps release papers without flipping past page 1, you know you've done your job correctly. You understand systems. Systems have rules, and every rule has flexibility. You haven't broken anything yet, but you've learned where it bends. The call doesn't come through your company line. It comes to your personal phone. You recognize the name. Regional Operations Director for a security logistics client you've handled before. You cleared armored SUV parts through Mombasa for them. Managed bonded transfers in Izmir. Always clean. Always compliant. He asks to meet off-site. A hotel bar near the airport. Neutral territory. Low lighting. No logos on his jacket. He doesn't waste time. They have a contract expanding in Eastern Europe. Stabilization work, he calls it. Infrastructure protection. Advisory support. The language is familiar. What's different is the urgency. They need expedited movement of restricted hardware. Not prohibited. Not sanctioned. Just complicated. End-user certificates that require ministerial signatures. Temporary export waivers. Routing through a third-country intermediary to avoid administrative delays. Nothing illegal, he repeats, just sensitive. You already understand what that means. He slides a thin folder across the table. Preliminary manifests. Product descriptions carefully drafted. Optical enhancement devices. Personal protective systems. Encrypted field communication units. Optics. Body armor. Radios. The destination is technically an allied partner force. The paperwork will reflect that. The end-user certificate will be legitimate. The issue isn't legality, it's friction. The region is politically unstable. Oversight committees move slowly. Their deployment timeline does not. They need someone who knows how to move things through customs-heavy corridors without attracting unnecessary inspection. They need you. The compensation structure is simple. A consultancy contract. Discretionary performance bonus. If the first shipment clears within 10 days, your payout equals 4 years of your current salary. 4 years for one movement. You don't answer immediately. You ask about compliance. He smiles slightly. Everything will be documented, reviewed, approved. Eventually, they just need to sequence the approvals in parallel rather than in order. You know what that means. File certain documents after departure instead of before. Route through a bonded warehouse in a jurisdiction with flexible re-export rules. Use a freight forwarder subsidiary instead of your primary firm. Technically, defensible. Aggressively optimized. He frames it as stabilization. Protective gear. Communications equipment. helping allied forces maintain order. Prevent escalation. Reduce casualties. You tell yourself you are not shipping weapons. You are shipping protection. It's just logistics. You've bent regulations before. Adjusted descriptions. Timed filings. Managed gray areas. This is simply a larger gray area. You review the manifest again. Nothing explosive. Nothing overtly lethal. You imagine the transfer working smoothly. Container sealed. Cleared. Loaded onto rail. No one harmed. You agree to handle the first shipment. When you sign the consultancy contract later that night, your hands are steady. It's just logistics. The third shipment is where the language changes. The manifest says Industrial Hydraulic Assemblies. HS code 8412-21. Standard classification for linear acting hydraulic power engines. Heavy. Dense. Unremarkable. The paperwork reflects a subcontractor supplying drilling equipment to a mining operation. The crates are uniform, heat-treated pine, export stamped, vacuum-sealed interior lining. Inside are disassembled assault rifles packed in cosmoline and layered between machine steel components to distort density scans. Barrels separated from receivers, firing pins vacuum-packed inside labeled spare parts kits, ammunition sealed in moisture-proof tins beneath false metal plating. You don't open the crates, you don't need to. The weight distribution tells you everything. This is no longer optics and protective gear. You move the cargo through a secondary cargo terminal outside a permissive airport in Eastern Europe, one that processes high freight volume with limited physical inspections. You've studied their thresholds. Random inspection rate below 8% for bonded transit cargo. The key is classification layering. The shipment departs as domestic machinery components headed to a free trade zone in a third country with flexible re-export policies. From there, it will be redocumented under a different export authority and forwarded to its final destination under a revised end-user certificate. The original exporting country never sees the true consignee. You arrange bonded transit status to avoid customs duties and detailed inspection. The cargo remains sealed under custom flock, theoretically untouchable without triggering a multi-agency review. The aircraft is chartered under a leasing company registered in Malta, but reflagged temporarily through a Baltic operator with looser oversight. The crew rotates at the intermediate stop. No one asks questions outside their compartmentalized role. At the cargo terminal, you watch the pallets move across the tarmac at night. Sodium lights cast everything in dull orange. There is a moment during pre-clearance where a customs officer lingers too long over the documentation. You recognize hesitation. You also recognize leverage. A facilitation fee moves through an intermediary, not cash in an envelope, nothing crude. An expedited inspection services invoice paid to a consulting firm owned by the officer's cousin. It clears within the hour. The cargo is loaded. When the aircraft taxis, you feel it for the first time. Not fear exactly. Compression. Your pulse in your throat. You understand that if the plane is opened mid-route, this becomes international trafficking. You track the flight on a secondary monitor. Watch it cross airspace. Cross a border. Descend. It lands. No inspection. No seizure. No diplomatic cable. 3 hours later, confirmation arrives. Cargo transferred successfully to ground convoy. By morning, funds settle into an offshore account in Cyprus under your consultancy entity. Clean. Layered. Converted. No calls from regulators. No audits. No knock at your door. You sit in your office overlooking the port and stare at the cranes moving containers like nothing has changed. You realize how easy it was. After that flight, the requests stop feeling exceptional. They become structured. You formalize everything. A holding company registered in the UAE under a generic logistics name. A paper entity in Cyprus to handle consulting. An LLC in Delaware to interface with Western banks without raising suspicion. Each one layered, each one with separate directors on paper. Nominee services. Corporate secrecy jurisdictions. Clean enough to pass initial review. Complicated enough to discourage deeper curiosity. You don't move weapons. You move permissions. A broker in Sofia begins supplying end-user certificates pre-signed by officials in countries with porous oversight. The documents are technically authentic, stamped, archived, sequentially numbered, but the units listed as recipients either don't exist or have been quietly dissolved. No one checks in real time. Verification requests take weeks. Your shipments move in days. Retired colonels appear as defense consultants, men who understand procurement language and speak it fluently. They draft letters on official letterhead referencing stabilization mandates and bilateral security cooperation agreements. The phrasing is deliberate, dense, bureaucratically exhausting, enough to discourage mid-level customs officers from escalating. You study sanctions regimes the way you once studied tariff schedules. Most sanctions don't prohibit everything. They prohibit specific entities, specific classifications, specific destinations. You learn to alter one variable at a time. If the buyer is restricted, you change the intermediary. If the item classification triggers review, you break the shipment into component parts under separate codes. Receivers as machined housings, barrels as steel tubes, optics as surveying equipment. If a country is embargoed, you route through a free trade zone where cargo can be redocumented under new export authority. Jebel Ali, Limassol, Port Klang, goods enter under one identity and exit under another. Insurance becomes another layer of insulation. Cargo policies are written against industrial components. In the event of seizure, the claim reflects misdeclared machinery lost in transit. Liability shifts to subcontracted freight handlers. You structure contracts or responsibility fragments across jurisdictions. No single document ties everything together. Aircraft leasing becomes strategic. Instead of chartering under established carriers, you arrange short-term wet leases through operators that rotate tail numbers under temporary registration. Planes reflagged for 30 days at a time. Maintenance logs compliant. Ownership opaque. You rarely meet anyone in person now. Everything moves through encrypted messaging platforms and staggered email chains. Compartmentalization is standard practice. No one sees the full map except you, and the map keeps expanding. Payments increase, 7 figures per quarter. Then per month, funds flow through layered accounts before consolidating into investment vehicles, real estate trusts, shipping equity stakes, commodity positions. Clean capital emerging from gray movement. People begin referring to you quietly as a fixer. When a shipment is stuck in customs in North Africa, they call you. When a minister's signature is delayed in the Balkans, they call you. When a rival contractor's cargo is seized, they call you to prevent it from happening again. You don't carry weapons. You don't train militias. You don't enter conflict zones. You rearrange paperwork and air routes. But without you, nothing moves. At some point, the fear that defined the first flight fades into calculation. Every risk has a price. Every official has pressure points. Every regulation has interpretive flexibility. The machine runs because you understand its tolerances. Money accumulates faster than you can meaningfully spend it. You upgrade your apartment, then purchase property through a holding entity. You diversify passports. You retain legal counsel preemptively. You tell yourself you are operating in the space between policy and practice. Government's posture. Contractors execute, you facilitate. The system requires operators who can translate intent into movement. You are no longer reacting to requests. You design the routes. You build redundancies. You anticipate scrutiny before it forms. And somewhere in the middle of it, watching 3 simultaneous shipments move across 3 continents without friction, you feel it. Not relief. Not even satisfaction. Something closer to invulnerability. They stop calling you a consultant. Now you're invited. Doha first. Business class ticket booked through a defense subcontractor. A hotel suite overlooking the water. You're met in a private conference room where men with military posture and tailored suits speak in acronyms, procurement timelines, regional stabilization mandates, equipment shortfalls. A general shakes your hand and thanks you for your efficiency. You nod like this is normal. Dubai next. Meetings in glass towers where private military executives wait for your routing assessment before committing to field operations. They don't sign contracts until you confirm viability. You decide whether something moves in 10 days or 90. In Istanbul, a procurement intermediary refuses to greenlight a shipment until you review the export structure. He knows that if you structure it, it lands. Your cut per shipment crosses into 7 figures. Not theoretical. Cleared, converted, distributed through layered accounts before settling into assets that generate more assets. You carry multiple passports now. 1 European, 1 Caribbean investment citizenship, 1 original. You understand visa regimes the way you once understood tariff codes. You know which border agents care about overstays and which care about demeanor. You've learned the calibration of influence. In some ministries, tuition payments to a nephew's university account open doors more cleanly than cash. In others, envelopes still work, delivered through assistants who never make eye contact. In certain ports, the gift isn't money at all but a future job offer at a consulting firm you quietly control. You manage simultaneous operations across 2 continents. Armored vehicles shipped as agricultural transport units. Drone systems broken into avionics, propulsion assemblies, and imaging modules routed separately before reassembly near destination. You coordinate convoy clearances while finalizing air freight leases. You monitor customs clearance timestamps across 3 time zones. It feels surgical. The scale increases gradually. Heavier assets, larger contracts, entire battalion-level equipment packages moved in phases to avoid detection thresholds. You orchestrate sequencing so nothing appears abnormal in isolation. Contractors wait on your approval before deploying men into hostile zones. Governments rely on the appearance of deniability you construct. You start believing you control outcomes. If something moves, it's because you allowed it. If something stalls, it's because you decided the risk profile shifted. The illusion builds quietly. Then one shipment fails to confirm receipt. An armored vehicle consignment routed through a North African free trade zone disappears between port transfer and inland convoy. GPS trackers deactivate simultaneously. Insurance documentation activates as designed. Liability fragments. You initiate back-channel inquiries. No response. 2 weeks later, a report surfaces in a regional paper, unverified, quickly buried, suggesting an armored platform matching your shipment description was seen in a militia-controlled district. There are rumors of civilian casualties during a checkpoint incident. The contractor dismisses it as misinformation. You review the routing logs again. Everything was clean. Documented, approved. You tell yourself equipment doesn't choose its use. Your role ends at delivery. You have 3 other operations in motion. Deadlines, payments, meetings scheduled in Dubai. You close the article and move to the next shipment. The meeting isn't dramatic. No raid, no summons, no public attention. You receive a message through a secure channel you didn't know they had access to. A short request for a face-to-face discussion. Location, a neutral conference room inside an embassy compound in a European capital. Time, early morning. When you arrive, there are no raised voices. 2 representatives sit at the table. One from a defense liaison office. One who introduces himself only by initials and an agency affiliation that doesn't need clarification. They don't accuse you of anything. They don't need to. They begin with specifics. Shipment dates, routing details, corporate structures, bank transfers. They reference entities you thought were insulated. They reference conversations you assumed were compartmentalized. You understand immediately, this is not an investigation. It's a consolidation. They know your logistics network. They know your shell companies. They know your brokers. They know which shipments were labeled industrial machinery and which were segmented into components. They also know the geopolitical context of your routes. They are not interested in stopping you. They are interested in directing you. The situation is framed carefully. Official channels cannot authorize certain transfers directly. Public procurement oversight restricts overt transactions. But regional security objectives require flexibility. They need intermediaries. They need movement without signatures that can be traced to state budgets. We prefer this to stay unofficial, one of them says. The phrasing is deliberate. Preference, not demand. They explain the structure. Funding will originate from defense appropriations routed through subcontractors. Those subcontractors will contract your consultancy for logistics management. The documentation will remain compliant at each layer. Nothing illegal on paper, but strategically aligned. You will continue to move equipment, including heavier assets, but now under discrete alignment with broader security initiatives. You ask one question: what changes? Nothing, they say. Everything continues, just with coordination. They do not threaten prison. They do not need to. The message is subtler. They have visibility. They can escalate if required, but cooperation is cleaner. You realize something in that room. You are no longer operating outside the system. You are inside it. Contracts are presented. Non-disclosure agreements thicker than manuals. Security clauses referencing national security exemptions. Liability waivers. Jurisdictional arbitration provisions that render disputes invisible. You sign. Each signature feels procedural, administrative, necessary, but you understand the threshold now. This is no longer gray zone entrepreneurship. This is institutional integration. Your shipments now include assets designated for state-aligned forces, armored platforms, surveillance drones, tactical communication systems. The routing structures remain complex, but oversight shifts. Briefings replace speculation. Your contacts now include procurement officers embedded within government frameworks. The money flows through defense subcontract chains. Your role becomes standardized within their architecture. You are not asked to change methods. You are asked to maintain continuity. When you leave the embassy that morning, nothing looks different outside. The city moves. Cars pass. People go to work. But internally, the lines have redrawn. You are no longer a rogue operator exploiting loopholes. You are part of the mechanism that defines where goods move and why. Protection comes with alignment, and alignment comes with permanence. You cross a line that doesn't uncross. You just didn't notice when it happened. The routine changes first. You start rotating phones on a schedule, not because anyone told you to, but because that's what people in your position do. New burner devices every week. Separate numbers for different regions. Encrypted apps layered with additional verification. You stop keeping contacts in one place. Nothing is centralized. Nothing is permanent. You vary your routes home. Different exits from buildings. Alternate parking levels. You scan reflections in glass storefronts without thinking about it. It becomes automatic. Sleep gets thinner. At first it's stress, then it's pattern recognition, then it's habit. You wake up at 3 a.m. with your mind already running logistics simulations, checking timelines, replaying conversations, reviewing shipment IDs in your head. You tell yourself it's discipline. But the silence in your apartment feels different now. Larger, more intentional. You begin checking your car before entering it. Not dramatically, just casually. Under the chassis, wheel wells, license plate frame. You know where trackers are usually placed. Magnetic, low profile. You've seen training materials. You've read enough incident reports. Nothing ever appears there. Still, you check. Travel becomes lonely in a new way. Airport lounges replace hotel bars. You sit alone with a drink you don't finish. Screens blow with market news and regional updates. You scan headlines out of instinct. One morning, a journalist publishes a story linking multiple shipments of dual-use equipment to destabilized regions. The article is vague, but the details feel uncomfortably close. Route descriptions, transit hubs, corporate structures. Nothing directly names you, but the architecture is recognizable. Your name isn't mentioned. Yet, you forward it to your legal team. They respond calmly. No cause for alarm. The structure remains compliant. Everything is defensible. Still, your pulse doesn't slow. Then a shipment gets publicly traced. A consignment of components, routed through a free trade zone months ago, is referenced in a parliamentary hearing. Politicians use phrases like arms proliferation concerns and supply chain transparency. The language shifts from operational to political. That's when you notice the tone change in calls. Your usual contacts speak more cautiously. Emails become shorter. Meetings move to more formal environments. Security clearance confirmations are requested more frequently. Competitors you once worked alongside start disappearing from the network. One fails to respond to standard coordination messages. Another withdraws from a shared contract. Rumors circulate of investigations. Asset freezes, travel restrictions. You don't know if it's coincidence or containment. Your alignment with state channels no longer feels like protection. It feels like proximity to liability. In one meeting, a liaison avoids eye contact when discussing a pending shipment review. Another mentions policy realignment without elaboration. You understand shifts in language. When they start saying transparency instead of efficiency, something has changed. You begin noticing how often your name appears in internal documentation requests. How many times legal wants to reconfirm compliance alignment. How frequently approvals require higher-level signatures. The system that once moved through you effortlessly now introduces friction. That friction feels deliberate. You review your holdings, corporate structures, contract layers. Everything appears intact. But confidence is not a document. It's a perception, and perception is changing. You realize you are no longer shielded by usefulness alone. You are visible. Exposure doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually, through tone shifts, document requests, political speeches, media narratives. The machine still runs, but now it runs with scrutiny. And you can feel the difference. For the first time in years, you consider what happens if protection stops being useful. Not legally, practically. The shift becomes official without announcement. One morning, your bank accounts are frozen. Not all at once, just the primary operating entities. A compliance notice references international sanctions coordination. Transaction holds pending review. No accusation in the language, just procedure. Then, the secondary accounts follow. Your holding companies are added to a watch list. Payment processors terminate relationships. Insurance carriers invoke clause reviews. Shipping partners request immediate clarification on active contracts. Your legal team tries to respond, but responses are routed into automated queues. The first public signal is a sanctions listing published by a multinational regulatory body. Your name appears under an expanded designation category tied to destabilizing transfers. The wording is bureaucratic, neutral. It does not accuse you of intent. It describes risk exposure and policy alignment violations. Within hours, news outlets repeat it. Headlines simplify everything. You are no longer a logistics specialist. You are labeled a war profiteer, an enabler of conflict supply chains, a destabilizing intermediary. The institutions that once relied on you issue statements of distance. The defense subcontractor releases a press release emphasizing compliance, transparency, and internal reviews. They state that any transactions associated with you were conducted independently and within legal frameworks. Your consultancy name is referenced carefully, as if it existed in isolation. Embassies respond with similar language: no official connection, no ongoing engagement, full cooperation with oversight bodies. The tone is consistent. You watch as former contacts decline interviews. Some claim they barely interacted with you. Others say your services were retained by third parties without their knowledge. A few suggest your network operated beyond their authority. Officials testify in closed hearings, then summaries leak to the press. Statements emphasize national security, due diligence, and systemic safeguards. Your contracts are described as external and unaffiliated. The narrative consolidates quickly. The same structures that wired funds through subcontract chains now describe you as an independent actor exploiting gaps. You read the language carefully. It is precise enough to protect them, and flexible enough to isolate you. An arrest follows in a third country where one of your shell entities maintained a registered office. You were detained during a routine administrative review at an airport transit lounge. No dramatic raid. Just an inquiry escalated by an international notice. Extradition proceedings begin quietly. Legal teams argue jurisdiction. Compliance officers cite documentation gaps. But the freeze remains. Travel restrictions expand. Your passports are flagged. The media coverage intensifies. Panels discuss arms proliferation networks. Experts reference destabilization patterns. Your name becomes shorthand for intermediary systems that operate between states and contractors. Public opinion solidifies around simplicity. You are the face, not the architecture. Inside the detention facility, there are no speeches, no confrontations, just procedural hearings, filing deadlines, formal notifications, paperwork translating your operations into violations. The contractor that once praised your efficiency states they cannot comment on ongoing legal matters. They express confidence in the justice process. The government entity that previously coordinated indirectly issues a statement reaffirming commitment to transparency and international norms. No one denies the shipments existed. They deny ownership of responsibility. Your assets remain frozen. Your corporate structures are dissolved through regulatory orders. Licenses revoked. Registrations canceled. Your influence collapses document by document. There is no final confrontation, no dramatic courtroom revelation. Just signatures, just notices, just systems executing policy. When the decisions conclude, you are no longer central to anything. The routes continue under new intermediaries. The contracts are reassigned. The machine adjusts. Without you, the cell is smaller than you expected but larger than your thoughts at night. Or it is house arrest in a quiet building far from any port. Far from any airport, where the windows do not open and the schedule is controlled by permission. Either way, movement is no longer yours to design. Time no longer depends on shipments or approvals. It passes without your input. The news cycle rotates quickly. Your name fades. Headlines shift to new conflicts, new investigations, new crises. Panels stop referencing you. Analysts move on to the next disruption. The language changes from outrage to routine. Conflicts continue. Supply chains adapt. Routes reconfigure. New intermediaries emerge. Contracts are rewritten. Compliance structures expand. The machinery of movement remains intact. Only the personnel change. Weapons still flow through different entities under revised structures, managed by someone who understands the same documents you once optimized. Somewhere in a hotel lobby, a younger logistics manager reviews a proposal. The lighting is neutral. The conversation is calm. End-user certificates are discussed. Transit zones are mapped, timelines are negotiated. The meeting feels familiar. The language is almost identical to what you once used. Outside, travelers check in. Port cranes continue to move containers. Aircraft lift off and descend according to schedule. The world does not pause to mark your absence. Inside your confinement, you no longer manage risk. You no longer structure permissions. You no longer anticipate regulatory thresholds. There are no routing decisions to make. No brokers to coordinate. No systems to align, only silence. You think back to the first shipment, to the ease of it, to the illusion of control, to the moment when movement felt like mastery. Now it feels distant, mechanical, as if it belonged to someone else. The institutions that once protected you have restructured. The contracts have been reassigned. The architecture remains, but your role inside it has been removed. You are no longer infrastructure. You are a case file. The system continues without interruption. It was never dependent on one operator. It was designed to persist. And in that realization, there is no anger left. Only clarity. You were never the story, just a part of it.